Thank you. Hello, everybody. On behalf of the Global Tech Advocates Future of Work Group, I'd like to welcome you to our discussion around the shape we're in. This event is part of our Uncovered series, looking at the hidden aspects of the future of work. Today, we're looking at organisational change with special guest, organisational psychologist, Miriam Edelman. As the tectonic plates of work, life and everything else have shifted, how are organisations of all types and sizes reappraising the social and psychological structures of how, where and why we work? So now it's over to my colleague Louise Barfield to introduce Miriam and interview her on this subject. Thank you both.
Thanks. Thank you, Jan. It's great to be here and to introduce Miriam. And as a starter, let me just tell you more about Miriam. Miriam Edelman is an organisational psychologist who has worked across multiple continents for over 30 years in management, academia and consulting. And as a proficient communicator, she's a master's in organisational social psychology from the London School of Economics. Her expertise includes decision-making, organisational design, and strategic transformation, a subject that will come up today, I'm sure, as well as culture and managing volunteers and non-employed staff. Her work covers research, change and innovation, and also looking at those international and intercultural issues and experiences that we all have to encounter. So welcome, Miriam. It's good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
And in your work, and in the context of the last 2 years, you know, a lot of your work is about transforming organisations and teams. But what's changed, do you think, in the context of what's happened in the pandemic? What's different about this?
I think the big difference is that we've seen an acceleration of changes that were happening and that were, in a lot of cases, being resisted. So we've known for a long time that there are significant needs to digitize. And we've seen a lot of companies embracing a lot of the changes that happened in the pandemic, but actually a fairly small percentage. So what we've really seen happening is an accelerating acceptance of these very slow shifts. I think we've seen that, you know, amongst our own lives as well, that some of us have used things like Zoom, for instance, on a fairly small basis, but now everyone knows how to use it. Everyone uses it. So I think a lot of those things like remote work and using those kinds of technology tools, Slack and other communication devices, Zoom and Teams and all of the rest of that, has been a major shift that was happening, but now things are moving more quickly. And a lot of that, the impact on the office and on going back into hybrid works, we're going to see those kinds of changes that I think we're already in the mix.
And do you think that some companies and organizations have been impacted worse or better than others, you know, which have come out a bit more strong? Well,
I think in terms of individuals, we've certainly seen a disparate impact on who's been affected by the change. So the people who've had the comfort of being able to work from home, mostly professionals, but not exclusively, have had a pretty good pandemic. They may have had stress, but that's been a lot easier. And there's been a lot of changes for them to accept. But the real impact have been, of course, on frontline workers who are disproportionately socioeconomically and in terms of other kinds of cultural issues tend to be disadvantaged. So there's been a big impact for them. One of the things that I think isn't necessarily discussed as much is the impact that it's had on early career professionals. So people who are early in their careers are suffering a lot because there's a tendency, there was an interesting study that was done with Microsoft that when people are working in virtual teams or not necessarily in person, that their communications tend to be static and siloed. So they tend not to talk to people they don't normally talk to. And not to suggest that this leads to groupthink, but it means that people don't get included. So I worry a little bit about the early career professionals who aren't having those spontaneous moments of getting to observe their peers, of getting to, or their people who've had more experience and been with the firm longer. And they're not getting that sort of informal mentoring. And if you're really early in your career, you don't know what to ask for. So I think for those people who are listening who are in a position where you may have that kind of influence, be conscious of the people who are at the beginning of their careers, because they may be suffering more than we really understand yet.
So that's interesting. So looking forward then, are there some people who will need to not just catch up, but actually will benefit because they've learned new skills and they've got that platform? And who's going to miss out? If someone who's just maybe restarted their career or just in a new role, are they going to miss out?
Well, I hope not. And I think that's going to vary across different organizations. Certainly being adaptable and being able to use these new skills and these new technologies is going to be helpful. There is some concern about people restarting careers. That obviously there's been a huge number of people in Britain and America, particularly women, who've dropped out of the workforce or shifted a little bit. On the other hand, we're seeing labor having a great deal more power at the minute, with the Great Resignation going on across most of the Western world, where people are not putting up with bad employers anymore. So I think the power is now back in the hands of the workers, and I think people are rightly demanding to be treated better. I think companies that are able to manage that and to respond appropriately are doing very well and will continue to.
So would you describe those organizations as more robust and resilient, and structurally, what makes them resilient in the first place?
Resilience is interesting. I think the most important part of resilience is being adaptable, but the companies who are probably doing the best are the ones who are listening, who are concerned about what has been called the employee experience. We've been very focused on the customer experience in the business world, but I think people are paying attention to the employee experience. And the companies that are not suffering from many people resigning are the people who have good work cultures, who look after their staff, who are listening to what their employees need and trying to accommodate that. And so I think the resilience of focusing on being adaptable to what your employees need is what's going to make you strong in the long run.
Interesting how you see resilience almost like a muscle. Then it's almost like having that, not just being smart and having the right advisors, but you've got to have something culturally there then that is about listening, about having that openness. Do you think is that something that's come through?
Yeah, advisors don't last, and having smart people doesn't necessarily make for a successful company. The people at Enron were brilliant. I think the adaptability and being able to shift, this is what we see in individuals. We see this in the biological world. Look at the resilience of this horrible virus, that it keeps mutating and adapting to be able to survive and continue. And I think that's true for almost any organism. So for a company to be able to be adaptable, to be good at change, really, is what's going to make a difference. And I think that's what we've seen. Companies that were already doing some of these technology things, were working with virtual teams across the world, and had some experience with that, obviously had a head start. But the companies who responded quickly and who listened to their employees and who were trying to look after them and adapt and deal with the changing circumstances as best they could, those are the companies I think that are doing better. And the people who are focused on coming back to normal as if the last couple of years never happened, I think they're going to suffer. That's not an adaptability strategy.
Intriguing that you mentioned that, almost like the attitude, the mindset. That, do you think that maybe the younger organization then that was quite hungry for change anyway because it wants to grow or maybe partner or work collaboratively, that was almost sort of in the DNA? And are the older creaky organizations, is that too much of a sort of extreme comparison?
Interestingly, we're not seeing that correlation at all. There does not seem to be any correlation with being young and small versus old and big, or either of those axes. A lot of the larger corporations certainly had the resources to be able to adapt quickly, and that helped. And there are many big companies who've done a really good job, and really rethought how they work and how they can look after their staff. There's also some very young, hungry, small companies that didn't. And I think a lot of this hinges on how you see your role as managing staff. So if you are very focused on control, that I need to see my people so I can make sure they're working, then you're not going to do very well. And the truth is that many small organizations often are not particularly greatly managed. If people haven't experienced good management, if they haven't come up through those kinds of ranks and haven't studied it as a profession, then frequently they're not great at it. Entrepreneurs, take Steve Jobs as the prime example, are frequently not great managers.
And management is very much the currency. That's how you've developed, haven't you? The practice and the experience that you've had in large organizations, where management is almost a misnomer in times of change because people act differently. So do we need managers in the same way now then, or has that sort of discipline changed?
I think as a profession, it has not changed. The problem is that many people think they are managers when really they're just bosses. And the difference is, if a manager is someone who's there to facilitate getting work done, and a coach and developing their staff and all the things that a professional manager does, we need that even more. And those people are even more critical, especially for those young career professionals I was talking about, to help us get through this. Communications is critical, and that's what a hierarchy of good managers can do, is make sure that messages are coming out consistently and that people are getting the transparency that they need and that they hunger for right now, especially. So the kind of management of bean counting and micromanaging and feeling like you have to see your staff in the office during particular hours to be able to trust them, that I think is taking a hit, because those people have not been able to get that kind of control. I don't think that's coming back. And unless you learn to be a real manager, I think you are going to suffer.
And a real manager is someone who is more rounded then. You mentioned having more empathy or listening, or actually feeding back some of those concerns if you're a younger member of staff or someone who feels slightly sort of discombobulated. Then our managers, the sort of facilitators of change in a way that has been forced and now is going to become a sort of a new wave, if you like. I mean, you mentioned mutation. Do we need sort of mutant managers then?
Oh dear. Yeah, perhaps. I think good managers have always been able to do those things. And I think if people are focused on their role as a manager, as opposed to someone who knows the work best or someone who controls people, then they have those skills. Those skills are available to them. And there's ways to learn and become better at that. There are clearly roles for people to be the communication, the developer, the coach, all of those things that a good manager ought to be doing to look after staff. I think it's needed more than ever. And I think there's always been good managers who can do that. We need more of it. And the people who feel that the way that they manage is by walking around and seeing people working and telling people what to do minute by minute, that we don't need. I don't think we ever did.
I mean, does it feel different then? Because obviously you're based in the States. You can see the changes from economic perspectives, but also your work in London, you dealt with a lot of global organizations that either had to change because of the compliance, you work in banking, or now culturally, we're now trying to attract or retain talent. So our managers tasked with actually keeping hold of people and stopping them from walking out the door.
I hope so. I think that's definitely something they should be doing. It is so much more expensive to train new talent. You are so much better off. The evidence is absolutely clear that if you can upskill your staff and retain them, keep them happy and productive, it's far better for the bottom line of the company. It also just makes for a happier work environment. People work better when they are feeling that they have the level of autonomy and trust from their managers. that we know that that's one of the big ingredients of job satisfaction. So for a manager to be ensuring that people are getting what they need and feel comfortable and involved in the purpose of the organization, they're doing a service to the company's bottom line as well as to the staff they're serving. So is it different? I think it's more urgent. And I think people are waking up to the fact that the kind of management that just made sure people were working is no longer really appropriate for the 21st century. It hasn't been, and it certainly isn't now.
Okay, if I understand you then, things have moved on. Some organizations were already there or on their way, and some are literally going to fall at the first hurdle if they don't pick up the signals of what's going on. Mm-hmm. As a final thought then, do you think we're in pretty good shape? I mean, things like hybrid coming into play. Are people, having had the big detox and the big resignations here, are we fit and well as organizations of different sizes, or do you think some people might need a sick note?
I think there are definitely companies that need a sick note. There are many organizations that I think are doing very well, that learned a great deal from the pandemic, that are adapting and being resilient and building those muscles. I think there are companies that are so focused on the past that they're missing the opportunities. Whether they need a sick note or a rude awakening, I'm not sure what's going to help them. That certainly if people are not happy, they're going to leave. They have that opportunity at the minute and they're taking it. So I worry about the ones who are so focused on going back to the way things were, as if there was nothing to learn.
That's very apt for our group, obviously, because we're all about the tech and the future of work, and you've definitely struck a chord with your points. So thank you very much. And we'll do a synopsis of this, but how can people get in touch with you? Via LinkedIn?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take emails, and that's probably the easiest way to find me. So. Brilliant.
Okay. Thanks, Miriam. It's fascinating. I think you bring a completely fresh perspective, not just because you're in another continent, but I think you've reframed a lot of the ideas that we've already talked about. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, both of you, for such a really fascinating conversation. There's much more that can be investigated, I'm sure. So if anybody who is watching would like to learn more about the Future of Work group, you can go to techlondonadvocates.org.uk and find out more about us and join us. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye. All right.